The bullet tore through my shoulder like a red-hot poker, spinning me backward against the wooden wall of the train car. Blood sprayed across the luggage, and I dropped to my knees, clutching the wound as chaos erupted around me. 3 masked men had boarded our westbound train just outside Tucson, their guns drawn and voices demanding everyone's valuables. I was riding in the cargo car, guarding a shipment of silver for the mining company when they burst through the door. The first shot missed. The second one found its mark. The robbery unfolded swiftly, but it was only the beginning of a much deeper betrayal that would shake the very foundation of everything I thought I knew. The sun was setting low over the Arizona desert, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the empty plains. The train rumbled steadily, its whistle cutting through the silence of the afternoon, signaling the end of another long day's ride. I was leaning against a stack of crates in the cargo car, eyes scanning the shifting horizon through the small window. The rhythmic clatter of the train wheels was a sound I'd grown used to, a constant companion on my solitary journeys. But that peace shattered in an instant. The door to the cargo car burst open with a violent crack, sending a rush of cold air into the car. The sharp odor of dust and sweat filled the space as 3 masked men stormed in, their guns drawn and their movements swift. Their eyes were wild with desperation, their hands shaking with the thrill of the crime. "Everyone down," one of them shouted, his voice thick with menace. "This is a robbery." I didn't move at first. My hand instinctively went to the revolver at my side, but I didn't draw it. Not yet. They were just getting started, and I wasn't about to let them know I was prepared for a fight. Not when they had the advantage. "Hand over the silver," another one barked, his voice tight with anger. I glanced toward the cargo, where a shipment of silver meant to pay the miners who worked in Copper Creek, was stacked in neat bundles. The thought of that silver in the hands of these men made my stomach twist. The third man, taller and meaner looking than the others, paced in front of the door, watching the passengers. I could hear the muffled sounds of people reacting in the other cars, shuffling, crying out, the sounds of people realizing the horror that was unfolding. The train was starting to slow now, the screeching of the wheels signaling that the engineer was probably under threat. It wouldn't be long before the whole thing came to a halt. And then it happened. The first shot. A gunshot rang out, echoing in the confined space. The bullet whizzed past my ear, missing by mere inches, the blast forcing my heart into my throat. My hand flew to my shoulder, instinctively clutching the pain that shot through me like a lightning strike. I was on my knees before I even knew what happened, blood splattering across the floor of the car. The second shot found its mark, and the world spun around me in a haze of agony. I looked up to see the masked man pointing his gun directly at me, his eyes wide with a strange, almost deranged satisfaction. But that wasn't what caught my attention. There, outside the door of the train, riding alongside us in the desert dust, was a familiar chestnut horse. The same horse I had helped break years ago, the same one that had carried me through countless miles of rough terrain. My breath caught in my chest as I saw the rider sitting tall in the saddle, his posture unmistakable. Thomas, my brother. The realization hit me harder than the bullet wound. Thomas, the man I had once trusted with everything, my family, my life, was now riding alongside a gang of outlaws just outside the train. He was part of this robbery, part of the group that had come to steal the silver, to take everything we had worked for, and leave behind nothing but destruction. He didn't even look at me. I wanted to call out to him to ask why. Why had he turned his back on me? Why had he become one of them? But I couldn't. The words died in my throat as I watched him ride past without a second glance. It was like he had forgotten who I was, forgotten the years we spent together, working side by side on our father's ranch, forgotten the bond we had shared, the bond that now seemed like a distant memory, washed away by greed and betrayal. The train lurched to a stop with a violent jolt, throwing me against the side of a crate. I gritted my teeth against the pain, the fire in my shoulder threatening to consume me as I tried to steady myself. Outside, The gang was shouting orders, demanding passengers line up, take what they could, and get out. The sound of women crying and men cursing filled the air, but I couldn't focus on that. I had to focus on what I had just seen. My brother. He had ridden away from me, his own flesh and blood, without so much as a glance in my direction. It wasn't just a betrayal of the law. It was a betrayal of everything we had once been. As I staggered to my feet, clutching my shoulder to staunch the bleeding, I realized something. Thomas had known I was on this train. He had to have. But he didn't care. He had left me to die, just like the rest of the passengers. And that knowledge made the pain in my shoulder feel like nothing. I was alone. The train stood still in the wasteland, its whistle trailing off into the vast emptiness, leaving nothing but silence behind. The air was thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder, sweat, and fear. I was still kneeling, clutching the wound in my shoulder, blood soaking through my shirt when I saw it. There, in the distance, a chestnut horse, galloping alongside the train with an eerie calm. My heart lurched in my chest as I recognized the familiar posture, the way the rider held the reins and sat in the saddle like he owned the land. Thomas. I felt my breath freeze in my chest, the world around me suddenly quieter. The pain from my shoulder seemed far away, irrelevant even compared to the ache that twisted through my gut. Thomas wasn't just a part of this robbery. He was leading it. He was one of them, a member of a gang that had come to steal everything, and he had no intention of stopping, not even for me. I could feel the eyes of the outlaws on me, their guns still drawn, their voices cutting through the air with their demands. But my attention was fixed on Thomas, just outside the train. My brother, riding alongside men who wore masks and carried guns. The same man I grew up with, the one who taught me to ride, who stood beside me when our father passed. The same man who had vanished, just like that, into the dust, and I had never questioned it until now. I couldn't even call out to him. He wasn't looking my way. His eyes were straight ahead, focused on the task at hand, focused on something far more important than his own flesh and blood. Thomas. I wanted to shout his name, but the words got stuck in my throat, choked by the confusion and the betrayal that felt like a rope tightening around my chest. He didn't turn. He didn't flinch. I watched as the train slowed to a stop. The gunmen's voices shouted orders now, and the passengers began to line up, no doubt terrified for their lives. Inside the cargo car, the chaos continued, but all I could focus on was the chestnut horse, my brother's horse, galloping parallel to the train, a stark reminder of everything that had gone wrong. My vision blurred. The pain from the bullet wound and my shoulder burned like a furnace, but it wasn't the pain that was eating me alive now. It was the realization that my brother, the one person I thought I could count on, had made a choice. And that choice was to ride with men who did not care who they hurt, who took what they wanted without remorse. The sound of hooves echoed outside as the gang's riders moved, circling the train, and I knew in that moment that I would never be the same again. He was out there, riding in the same dust, and yet he felt so far away from me. I stumbled to my feet, holding my shoulder, and the world swirled around me. My head felt light, dizzy, but my legs kept moving. I couldn't afford to lose consciousness. Not now. Not when Thomas was out there, so close, yet so far from the brother I had once known. The masked men were shouting now, demanding the passengers get out of the train. They had taken what they wanted, the silver, but it wasn't just silver they had stolen. It was the remnants of a life I'd once known. It was the family bond that had broken before my eyes. In the haze of blood and confusion, I heard the faint sound of Thomas's voice in my memory. He had been angry the last time we spoke, his words bitter, full of venom. "You always were Pa's favorite," he had said, his voice slurred with whiskey. "Maybe someday you'll learn what it feels like to be left behind." I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Drunk talk. That's all it was. But now, in the midst of this robbery, those words stung in a way I couldn't explain. Maybe they weren't just drunk talk. Maybe they were a warning. I had been left behind. I dragged myself to the side of the train, my legs unsteady, the weight of betrayal dragging me down with every step. Outside, the train's whistle screeched, and I caught one last glimpse of Thomas, his face partially obscured by his hat. But I knew him. I knew that posture. I knew that silver spurs. He had ridden past me without a second glance. The desert stretched out in every direction, an endless sea of sand and sagebrush. The train was long gone, its whistle fading into the distance like a memory, and now I was alone. The heat was unbearable, even in the fading light of dusk. The pain from my wound had settled into a dull ache, but it was the hollow feeling in my chest that gnawed at me the most. Betrayal. It cut deeper than any bullet. I tried to move forward, using a dead tree branch as a makeshift crutch, but each step felt like I was dragging myself through a nightmare. My brother, Thomas, had ridden past me today as I bled out on that train, as if I meant nothing to him. The reality of it hit me harder than the pain from my shoulder. Thomas, the man who had been my partner, my ally, had turned against me. It wasn't just the robbery or the silver. It was something deeper, something darker. He had chosen this life. He had chosen to ride with killers, with outlaws. And he had chosen to leave me to die. With every painful step I took, I thought about our past. The ranch, the land, our father's inheritance. I thought about the night Thomas had come to me, drunk and angry, blaming me for everything that had gone wrong in his life. He had accused me of taking everything he felt was owed to him. "You always were Pa's favorite," he had said, the bitterness heavy in his voice. "Maybe someday you'll learn what it feels like to be left behind." I never understood those words until now. The dust from the gang's riders still hung in the air like a cloud of regret, and I knew I couldn't go back. Not to the ranch, not to the life I had known. Thomas had burned that bridge, and now I was left to walk through the desert, bleeding, broken, and betrayed. The sun was setting, painting the sky with streaks of blood red and orange. The desert was beginning to cool, but the chill in my bones had nothing to do with the temperature. My thoughts were consumed by one question. Why? Why had Thomas done this? Why had he abandoned me when I needed him most? I tried to convince myself that maybe it was just a moment of weakness, that he had been caught up in the wrong crowd, that he had made a mistake. But deep down I knew. The Thomas the First had once known was gone. He had become someone else, someone I didn't recognize. And that someone had no place for me. The sound of hooves approached, and I tensed, my hand instinctively reaching for the revolver at my side. I turned, expecting to see more of Devlin's men, or maybe another outlaw. But the rider approaching wasn't one of them. He was alone, riding a black mare that moved with the ease of a creature used to the harsh desert. The stranger dismounted with a quiet grace, his movements calm and deliberate. He was older than me, maybe in his 50s, with graying stubble on a face weathered by too many years in the sun. His clothes were dusty but well kept, and a gleaming ivory-handled revolver hung from his hip. This man was no stranger to the life of a bounty hunter. "You're Jacob Morrison," he said, his voice low and steady. Not a question, but a statement. My heart dropped in my chest. How did he know me? And more importantly, why did it sound like he had been waiting for me? "Thomas told me I might find you out here," the stranger continued, his eyes scanning me with the detached professionalism of someone who had seen far too many men bleeding in the desert. The mention of my brother's name froze me in place. My blood ran cold despite the heat, and the world seemed to spin for a moment. My brother had sent this man after me to finish the job? Was Thomas really so far gone that he had decided to end my life too? I struggled to find my voice, forcing myself to stand straight despite the pain. "Who are you?" I managed to rasp. "Name's Samuel Crawford," the man said, his eyes never leaving mine. "I've been tracking your brother for the better part of 6 months." Crawford's words hit me like a sledgehammer. Thomas was being hunted, not just by the law, but by a bounty hunter, a man who had been tracking him for months. The man who had ridden with the gang today. The man who had been so willing to let me die in the dust, as long as it meant keeping his reputation intact. Tracking him for what? I forced out, my throat dry with dread. "Murder," Crawford said, his voice flat, emotionless. 3 people dead in El Paso. A bank clerk, a pregnant woman, and a 10-year-old boy who got in the way during his last job. I staggered backward, the world spinning around me. I couldn't process what I was hearing. Thomas? A killer? I'd known he had always been reckless, always chasing one quick payday after another. But murder? Children? It didn't make sense. It couldn't. You're lying, I whispered, even as a part of me knew it wasn't a lie. Crawford didn't flinch. He reached into his vest and pulled out a folded wanted poster, the paper crackling in the silence of the desert. He unfolded it slowly and held it out to me. I couldn't stop myself from looking, even though I knew what I'd see. There it was. Thomas's face, sketched in stark black ink. The words "wanted, dead, or alive" stamped beneath the image, followed by a reward amount that made my stomach drop. A reward for my brother. A price on his head. This wasn't the brother I had grown up with. The man I had known, the one who had taught me how to ride, how to shoot, how to survive in this unforgiving desert was gone. Replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone who had crossed the line into madness. Crawford was watching me closely, gauging my reaction. It was just the latest in a string of jobs he's been pulling across the territory, each one getting bloodier than the last. The wind kicked up, carrying the scent of dry earth and dust, but it couldn't clear the suffocating weight of betrayal that hung in the air. The truth was becoming clearer, and it was more painful than any bullet wound. Thomas hadn't just abandoned me today. He had orchestrated it. He had left me to die, knowing I would come after him. Why? I whispered, my voice breaking. Because he's become the kind of man who destroys anything he can't have, Crawford said, his eyes cold and steady. And right now, the thing he can't have is your forgiveness. I couldn't stop staring at the wanted poster, my brother's face haunting me with every detail. The face that had once been my closest kin, now twisted with the reality of the crimes he had committed. My thoughts were reeling, and the desert air, though warm, felt colder than ever before. My blood, still sticky on my shirt, seemed to freeze in place as I tried to comprehend what Crawford had said. Murder? Thomas? It was too much. My brother had gone down a path I couldn't follow. Crawford watched me carefully, his weathered eyes betraying little emotion, but there was something else behind them, something older than the life of a bounty hunter. The pain of loss, perhaps. The pain of having to track someone you once called a friend or a brother. But as the firelight flickered between us, I realized something deeper was at play. Crawford had no love for Thomas, but in some twisted way, he understood what I was going through. A sense of loss, a sense of duty. Your brother's been running, Jacob, Crawford said, breaking the silence. Running from his choices, but now he's backed himself into a corner, and he's expecting you to come after him. He's expecting this to be some final showdown between brothers. I looked down at the dirt beneath my feet. Crawford was right. Thomas had been expecting this. He had calculated everything, from the robbery to the betrayal. He wanted me to come. He wanted me to find him. But why? To kill me? To make me feel the same pain he had? Or was it something else, something deeper, something I couldn't yet understand? I shifted uncomfortably, my shoulder throbbing with each beat of my heart, but the pain from the bullet wound wasn't the worst part. The worst part was knowing that my brother, the one I had once looked up to, had become a stranger. A monster. I'm going after him, I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Crawford nodded slowly, his eyes hardening. I figured you would, he said, but you need to know something before you go. Thomas isn't just running from me. He's running from himself. Crawford's words sank into my chest like stones, heavy and unyielding. I had always thought of Thomas as the reckless one, the wild one. But now I saw. He was a man trapped in his own actions, too far gone to come back. The brother I had known was gone, replaced by a killer who had no place in the world I lived in. Where is he? I asked, my voice low but steady. The desert was starting to grow colder now, the night creeping in with all its shadows and dangers. Crawford didn't answer immediately. He turned, pulling his horse's reins, and walking toward a small campfire he had set up. The warmth from the fire flickered against the dark sky, casting long shadows over his face. He's holed up in a camp north of here, Crawford said, his voice low. almost as if he were speaking to himself. He's got men with him, but it's a temporary hideout. He won't stay there long. He'll know you're coming. And if you don't get to him first, he'll be gone again. And I don't know if you'll ever find him after that. I nodded, my mind already racing. I had no choice but to go after him. He was my brother, after all. And even if he had become someone else, someone unrecognizable, I needed to confront him. I needed answers. I needed to see for myself the man he had become. Not just for him, but for me. Why don't you come with me? I asked, my voice hardening. You know him. You've been chasing him. You can help me. Crawford's eyes flickered to mine, and for the first time, I saw a hint of something other than detachment. Regret, maybe. A shadow of something old and painful. I've been tracking him for 6 months, Jacob, Crawford replied quietly. I've seen what he's become, but this is something you need to do on your own. It's your brother, not mine. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. I knew Crawford was right. This wasn't just about stopping a man who had become a criminal. It was about finding out if there was any part of the man I once called brother still left inside him. The fire crackled between us, the silence thick and heavy with the weight of the journey ahead. As the night wore on, I could feel the distance between Thomas and me growing wider, more unbridgeable. And yet, I knew I had no choice but to keep walking toward him, to face him, to look him in the eye, and to find out what was left of the man I used to know. Crawford saddled his horse, preparing to leave. The sky above was dark now, with only the faintest sliver of moonlight to guide us. The night was cold, and I knew the desert would take everything it could from me before morning. But I had no time to wait for the dawn. We ride at first light, Crawford said, his voice steady but laced with something else. And I'll be right behind you. I nodded and made my way toward my own horse. Every step felt like a weight, dragging me down into the desert sands. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Now when my brother was out there, waiting for me, the desert stretched ahead, barren and relentless. The ground was hard beneath my boots, the air thick with the scent of sagebrush and dust. The pain in my shoulder had dulled to a constant throb, a reminder of the bullet that had almost ended me. And yet, it wasn't the physical wound that consumed me now. It was the war inside my chest, the battle between the man I had once called my brother and the stranger he had become. We had ridden through the night, the full moon, our only light, casting long shadows over the endless horizon. Crawford had stayed close behind, always a few paces away, watching me but saying little. It was clear that this was no ordinary pursuit. This wasn't about a bounty or an outlaw. This was about family, betrayal, redemption, and the painful reality that sometimes the people you love most can become the very ones you need to confront. By morning, we reached the ridge overlooking the small camp where Thomas had been holed up. The campfire was low now, just a few embers smoldering in the early light. 2 of his men were sitting nearby, their backs to us, talking in low voices. The third man, the one who had always been Thomas's shadow, was standing guard. It didn't take long for them to notice us. Crawford pulled his horse to a stop behind me, but I didn't wait for him. I didn't need him to walk this path with me. I had to do this alone. I dismounted quietly, my hand on the grip of my revolver, my eyes locked on the camp ahead. Every step I took toward the fire seemed to pull me further from the man I had once been and closer to the inevitable confrontation that awaited. The 2 men by the fire looked up as I approached, their hands going to their guns. But Thomas, sitting just beyond them, raised a hand. "Let him come," he said, his voice cold but steady. "This is between me and him." I stopped a few yards away, my heart hammering in my chest. There he was, my brother. He hadn't changed much on the outside. The same rough features, the same unshaven face, but there was something different about him now. Something darker. His eyes no longer held the warmth I remembered from our childhood. They were empty, filled with a cold calculation that chilled me to my core. "I knew you'd come," Thomas said, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You always were stubborn." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "I came because I need to know why." "Why, Thomas? Why did you do it? Why did you leave me to die on that train?" Thomas stood up slowly, his hands never far from his holster, and his eyes never leaving mine. "Because I had to," he said, his voice soft but filled with a quiet venom. "You wouldn't understand. You never did. You were always the good son, the one who did everything right. But I was never good enough for Pa. You think he loved you more than me? You think you deserve this ranch more than I do? That's why I left, Jacob. That's why I did everything. To prove I was more than just a shadow of you." The words hit me like a punch in the gut. The pain in his voice, the anger, the resentment, all of it was directed at me, the very man who had tried to do the right thing. The man who had stayed behind to work the land, to take care of Pa's legacy. And now, this was the man I was facing. The man who had turned his back on everything he once cared about, all for a twisted need to prove his worth. "I didn't take anything from you, Thomas," I said, my voice breaking as I spoke the truth. "You left. You chose to go. And when Pa died, I stayed. I didn't want the ranch. I wanted to keep what was left of our family." He shook his head, his hand tightening around his gun. "You were always better than me. Always smarter. Always quicker. Pa gave you everything, and I was left with nothing. You don't understand what it's like to be the second choice. The one who wasn't good enough to inherit the land. The one who was left behind." The words stung, but I wasn't about to let him pull me into his twisted logic. I had heard this all before. It was the same anger, the same bitterness that had been brewing inside him for years. But now it had festered into something darker, something more dangerous. "I'm not here to fight over the land, Thomas," I said, stepping forward. "I'm here because you're my brother, and I need to know if there's anything left of the man I grew up with." Thomas's eyes flickered, a moment of hesitation passing over his face, but then it was gone. He drew his gun in one fluid motion, and the sound of it echoed in the still morning air. "Maybe there's nothing left, Jacob," he said, his voice now hard as steel. "Maybe this is who I am now." I didn't flinch. I didn't move. The air between us was thick with tension, every second stretching longer than the last. The world around me seemed to fall away, and all that mattered was this moment. This confrontation. This painful reckoning with the brother I had once known and the man he had become. Thomas raised his gun, pointing it straight at me, and for a fleeting moment, I thought he might actually pull the trigger. But he didn't. Instead, he dropped the gun to his side and looked at me with a strange mixture of defiance and regret. "You never could understand, could you?" he asked quietly, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't do this to hurt you, Jacob. I did it because I couldn't live with the thought of being nothing, of being less than you." The weight of his words hung in the air, but I couldn't hold on to them. Not anymore. Not when I realized the truth. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if it was for him or for myself. Just as quickly as he had lowered his gun, Thomas turned away, mounting his horse with the cold detachment of a man who had already made his peace with his choices. "You should go," Thomas said, his voice distant now, the anger gone from his tone. "There's nothing left for you here." For a moment, I thought he might ride away, disappearing into the horizon like he had so many times before. But this time, I wouldn't let him. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice firm. "I'm staying. For me. For the family we were supposed to be." Thomas didn't answer. Instead, he rode off into the distance, leaving me with the silence and the firelight. The final confrontation had come and gone, and I was left standing alone, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel empty.